Wait, I have to take it.
No. Well, yes, I am. Yes, I am. On the podcast.
No, I'm the. Oh.
Great. Yeah.
Oh. How are you liking your process? It's cool. I was on a last semester. Yeah, they can find How are you feeling? Yeah, that's really very interesting. Yeah. Yesterday, I was very excited to so we were great. Are you going to do any other podcasts Really? Is that where you live? How do you love it? I do. Yeah, I love how I mean, it's still. Thank you. I was like, no. No, it's okay. No, you are.
Oh, okay. I was gonna wait until it's 10. I've been getting like. Yes. Yeah, that's right. It's whatever time. Oh, so it's easy.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the closing keynote of the 11th Annual South Asian Media and Cultural Studies Conference. This afternoon's event is made possible through the collaboration of several partners, including the College of Communication Information, the College of Social Sciences and Public Policies, Ruth K. and Shepard Broad International Lecture Series, and the Center for Global Engagement. We also extend our sincere gratitude to the organizers and volunteers who have worked hard to make this conference a success, and a very special thank you to Dr. Miriam Sheikh, whose efforts have been instrumental in connecting us with both of our keynote speakers this year. It is now my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Farwa Aamer. As the Director of South Asia Initiatives at the Asia Society Policy Institute in New York, Ms. Aamer oversees critical policy work and projects that address some of the most pressing issues in the region. In today's keynote, she will explore South Asia's role as a rising nexus of global geopolitics, economic growth, and climate resilience. Home to nearly a quarter of the world's population, the region is at the forefront of great power competition, climate changes, and socioeconomic hurdles. Ms. Aamer brings a wealth of experience to this discussion. Prior to her role at the Asia Society, she led research on transboundary river governance in the Himalayan region at the Stimson Center, focusing on water security, climate change, and regional cooperation. She has also worked extensively on non-traditional diplomacy and economic cooperation as the director of the South Asia program at the East-West Institute. With her expertise in fostering regional dialogue and policy solutions, we are fortunate to have her share her insights with us today. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Farwa Aamer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for this very kind introduction. As he introduced, I'm Farwa Aamer, the Director of South Asia Initiatives at the Asia Society Policy Institute in New York. Let me begin by sharing how delighted I am to be here at the Florida State University's South Asia Media and Cultural Studies Conference. This is also my first time in Florida, so if I seem overly thrilled, I hope you'll indulge me. I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Stephen McDowell, Dr. Miriam Sheikh, Professor John Mayo, Brian, and the entire team behind this remarkable conference. Your dedication to bringing together diverse voices from and on South Asia to discuss critical issues and opportunities is truly inspiring. You've also given me an excuse to escape the grave New York weather, so I really owe you big time here. Now, before we dive into South Asia, a region that demands our attention for countless reasons, let me pull back the curtain a little bit on the world of policy, what we do, how we do it, and occasionally how we make sense of all the chaos around us. At the Asia Society Policy Institute, we tackle everything from security and diplomacy to climate and innovation. We're a think tank, but don't let that name fool you. We just don't sit around and think. We believe in doing. As Asia reshapes the global balance of power, we focus on finding innovative, collaborative solutions to some of the region's and the world's most complex challenges. It's like solving the Rubik's Cube, where the colors keeps changing, which is all fascinating, frustrating, yet oddly addictive. So, if such a world interests you and you're truly curious about careers in policy, let me assure you that beyond your degree and your international relations knowledge, it is really your curiosity about the world and commitment to learning that will help you excel in the long run. The key is to stay informed, think critically, listen wisely, and communicate clearly. Now let's talk about South Asia, home to nearly 1.9 billion. It is as dynamic and vibrant as it is diverse. South Asia isn't just a region, it's an experience. From Bollywood blockbusters to cricket rivalries, its ancient history and cutting-edge innovation, its mango diplomacy, yes, that's a thing, and chai-fueled debates. But it's also a region of immense challenges: geopolitics, climate change, economic inequality, and yes, we also have the occasional border disputes. But here's the good news. South Asia's greatest asset isn't its geographical location or resources. It's its people. With one of the youngest populations in the world, with almost half the population under the age of 24, the region is brimming with creativity, energy, and resilience. Women in the region make up nearly half of the population, yet their contributions often go unfortunately unrecognized and underutilized. And let's be honest, no society can truly progress without half of its population left behind. If South Asia is to truly unlock its potential, women and youth must be at the forefront. They aren't just the future of the region, they are its present. They are the dreamers, the disruptors, and the change makers. And one of my early mentors, Ambassador Cameron Munter, often said, diplomacy shouldn't be left to the diplomats alone. His words have stuck with me. In a world grappling with shared challenges, we need fresh perspectives. We need innovative thinking. We need innovative diplomacy. And dare I say, we need a little bit of idealism. And who else to bring that to the table other than the youth of today? And when I discuss the power of people, I must also refer to the immense strength found in the connections we forge, especially across borders in this dynamic region, bound together by a rich tapestry of history and shared culture. I learned this firsthand at the age of 13 when I traveled to India from Pakistan as a part of a cross-border peace initiative hosted by the Dhirubhai Ambani School in Mumbai. The initiative itself was called Paigam, or Message. For a week, Pakistani and Indian students came together to work on projects and engage in fun yet collaborative bridge-building activities. It was a transformative experience. That experience first gave me a glimpse of what young South Asia could achieve if the nations worked together. It taught me that while policies divide, shared dreams can unite. This belief has guided my career and continues to fuel my optimism for South Asia. Sadly, regional collaboration, as much as it is vital, remains challenging to reach owing to bilateral political tensions in the region. Yet, imagine what South Asia could achieve if its nations worked together. Trade, innovation, economic integration could turn this region into a global powerhouse. But that starts with trust, dialogue, and a commitment to shared goals. Speaking of shared goals, let's take water as an example, a subject that's very dear to my heart. The Indus, the Ganges, and the Brahmaputra rivers are the lifeblood of South Asia, but they also traverse contested borders, fueling political rivalries. Addressing water insecurity in the region isn't just an environmental issue, it's a geoeconomic one. It's a question of diplomacy, economics, and inclusion. And here's where it gets really personal. Women and girls, especially in the rural areas across the region, walk miles every single day to fetch water from far off places, walking unsafe routes. They sacrifice the time that could be devoted to their education and skill development. Imagine if we address this challenge inclusively, involving women, involving policymakers, involving the youth, and involving the civil society. Imagine if we turned water from a source of tension into a wellspring of trust. Now, as I speak, I know what some of you might be thinking. Farwa, this sounds all great, but South Asia isn't necessarily known for its regional harmony. And that is correct. Political tensions remain. But history has shown us that even when we have some of the most entrenched contentions and issues, they could be overcome with a vision and determination. And of course, with leadership. This is where also diplomacy comes in, not as a tool of the elite, but as a bridge builder. Diplomacy isn't simply just about treaties and handshakes. At its core, it's about people. It's about finding common ground, even when it seems impossible. One of my favorite Roman emperors, and my response to every time someone asks me, who would you take for dinner, living or dead? It's Marcus Aurelius, who famously said, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. So really, if we collectively change our perspective, what seems like an obstacle today might just become an aid. As a young woman working in foreign policy, I've come to embrace that more and more over the years. When we do our research and analysis around hot topics and contentious issues that are happening around Asia and South Asia, even the globe, our aim is always to end on a positive note, or in our world, as we like to call them, policy options. What can the leadership, stakeholders, including the youth, the women, the civil society, academia actors that I mentioned, what can they do to get from A to B? That's where our impact lies. So let me end this real quickly because I really want this to be a conversation among us today. Despite these challenges that I've enlisted, but I think you might have already picked up on it, I remain an optimist. I don't really have a choice. The divisions and upheavals of today's world make the future seem uncertain. But I believe in the power of collective action and positive change. I've seen it in a group of 13-year-olds building bridges across borders. I've seen it in women transforming their communities, despite immense odds that lay their way. I've seen it as a South Asian working here in the United States with my fantastic colleagues. And I see it in the brilliance and energy of the people in this room today and all I've heard virtually. So here's what I'll say to everyone. Find your rhythm, use your skills, and be part of the solution. Whether you're a student, an academic, or a policy practitioner, your ideas matter. South Asia's potential is immense. And with collaboration and determination, we can unlock it together, not just simply for the benefit of the region, but really for the entire globe. Thank you, and I would love to take some of your questions now. Should I pull this?
If you'd like to.
Okay, I see a gentleman right there in red. The red check shirt.
You can't take
John's hoping I had to ask a question. So my question for you is that it's nice to say that you need to include everybody, but how do you get the people to the table who feel empowered and that they can do what they want without talking to people? And how do you also get the people to the table who felt they've never had a voice and won't be listened to? And when you do get them to the table, how do you get them to put down their differences and work on commonalities?
Thank you for that. Really, change has to begin from within. So if you're feeling like you can't raise your voice, it's a change that needs to begin here. And part of our job, and part of all of our jobs should be that if you think that people around you need to embrace their voice more, they need to be able to get to platforms where they'll be able to channel them confidently and find their safe spaces to do that. We provide it to them more and more. I think conversation begins with two people, and it just snowballs into something bigger, especially if it's a positive impact. But I'll speak strictly from a South Asia regional perspective, right? Increasingly in the past decade, a lot of local NGOs have started doing fantastic work where you can remain anonymous and you can still come to them with their needs and with your challenges, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in education, whether it's climate-related issues, whether it's natural disasters. You have access to those CSOs. You need to really empower those CSOs and NGOs, and that's where all the funding and the grants and international partnerships come into play. But they provide a good medium for, say, grassroots communities or indigenous communities to be able to access global platforms or at least get their voices through to some of these international platforms. The other thing you asked is how do you make sure you manage the differences? When the part of diplomacy, or part of supporting the idea of regional cooperation is to work with those differences. Sometimes differences are all right. For us to be able to have that diversity of opinion and the different voices come together on a subject helps us channel our energy and our research and analysis into providing where can we find this common thread. There has to be a common thread. And once we find that, we try to reconvene the group, or we try and find other means of communicating the ideas to them as to how they can put some of these differences aside. It's obviously much harder at track one or political level or the level of like governments and leaderships. There are a lot more nuances there, but it's a lot more feasible and doable at the community level, at people-to-people level. And so we found, for example, I bring up water once again because water diplomacy or water as a shared challenge has really brought people together. One of the first conferences I did on the idea of hydrodiplomacy in the Himalayan region, it was the same year as the Pulwama attack and almost escalation between India and Pakistan in 2019. Later that year, when we did this conference, we had an Indian expert and we had a Pakistani expert share the same table. So you can find those conversations and run after them, and you'll find people joining you in your quest. There's one here.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I have a question that's a little bit more personal for you. I'm interested in working possibly in like policy. I'd love to hear about, but my thing with policy is I want to feel like what I'm creating and what I'm researching and the recommendations are actually making a difference. Because the last thing I want to do is be an academic who sits in a corner and writes things that no one reads and no one hears about. So can you speak to a little bit about work you've done or work you've seen that's made an impact in the region and in the community?
no one would like their research papers to be sitting just with them or in a pile somewhere without an impact. But it's unfortunate that that happens. I'm not going to deny that doesn't happen. Part of working in a think tank environment, especially an established think tank environment, is that you find mechanisms to be able to amplify the work that you're doing. So I've been lucky, and since you asked more personal, from my personal experience, I've been lucky to work with institutes where I was able to research an idea that I felt very strongly about, hydro diplomacy, water security, women in water security, and take it to my organization and find ways of working internationally with others or regionally with other organizations to make sure that some part of what I think might be relevant can get through. It is definitely challenging for it to get to say all the parts that you want to cover, but I say this again from a very personal experience. It's one thing doing research papers, but there is a lot more traction to your work if you couple it up with, say, opinion pieces. Make use of journalism, make use of the media outlets. You have a 200-word page issue paper or policy paper or report that's really nice and well researched and has much to say. But if you can find 800 ways of saying the same and get it out, it does make an impact. It helps drive a larger audience to your work, who will then come to read the 200 words also. There is no easy answer as to what gets picked up and what not. We write so many things. My seniors have often taught me, don't use the word policy recommendations. We can't recommend governments to do anything, because if we do, they'll be like, okay, but we don't have the resources to get from A to B, so your recommendation is kind of like futile. But let's just say that you have an option for them, an option that will be able to get you to the mark that you want to, should you have the right resources, should you have the right mechanisms or frameworks in place. For many years, I have been constantly reiterating the need for India and China to ratify the International Water Conventions. China will not ratify the International Water Convention, yet I always make it a point to mention it, because that exists. And China is not going to pick it up and say, oh, Farwa Aamer said. And so PRC signs it. It's not how governments unfortunately work. But maybe there's someone who will see through the importance of it. Maybe if it's not in China, maybe in India, they'll see through the importance of it. So, but that's just one example. It's a quest. And with shifting political landscape, I think the quest, just, the game remains afoot. Through there. And gentleman in blue.
Hi, thanks for coming. I had a question about water, and water resources have been a big struggle in India for a long time. Vandana Shiva's done a lot of work pushing back against the international pressures to privatize water and the recognition of water as a kind of collective good. And in other parts of the world, in New Zealand, they've granted rights to a river. Similarly, in Ecuador, there's this movement to granting legal rights to natural entities as a way to preserve their resources and use them in an equitable way. I'm wondering if any of that is happening in India. Is the Ganges or other water resources? Is there kind of a debate around natural rights taking place within India, or what are the ways that these natural resources are being protected?
And in terms of their sharing, right?
Sorry?
Their transboundary sharing.
Yes, well, in the case of both New Zealand and Ecuador, I think those rivers, I think, are primarily within country. So right, I think the boundary crossing complicates
things. No, thank you for that. I can certainly speak from the shared river basin perspective in South Asia and the region. And India has shared rivers with Pakistan, with China, with Bangladesh. We're lucky that despite the very politically tense climate between India and Pakistan, they do have a water sharing agreement. The Indus Waters Treaty, which was arbitrated by the World Bank in 1960, that keeps the two countries at least in dialogue over the shared river and over actions on the shared river. Unfortunately, we do not have the same between India and China. And that's a classic example of what happens when you don't have a legally binding instrument in terms of how you're sharing the rivers, because that naturally impacts the health of the river foremost. Certainly, it is important from a geopolitical perspective. So one thing that we continue to emphasize on is that shared rivers should not be politicized. Unfortunately, they are. And if they are politicized, let's make sure they're not securitized. Now, the South Asia region, I love that. I love the region. I'm from the region, but it is remarkably disintegrated. We do not have regional frameworks that brings countries together. We used to have the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SARC, and I've seen it in its heyday. It was fantastic, but unfortunately, it has been dormant for many years, and water was never part of its conversation anyways. So there is no way for regional countries to come together and discuss shared challenges, including water. And that goes for the rest of climate-related issues, food security, energy security. Bilaterally, yes, but not so much on a regional scale. So when the sharing is concerned and wanting to make sure that there are equitable rights to each country that shares the rivers, and in a little bit more complex terminology, we call them riparian countries. So what happens, I mean, again, in India and Bangladesh's case, there's a Ganges Treaty, which is up for renewal actually in 2026. But India and China, coming back to it, it's a relationship that we have to watch for many reasons, primarily for geopolitical issue sets. There's a disputed border in the middle. There's a border that they contest called the Line of Actual Control, or the LAC. Now, the Yarlung Tsangpo Brahmaputra River flows, it starts in the Tibet Autonomous Region in China, and then it flows through downstream into India and Bangladesh. And China has been accused of damming activities throughout, including one of this colossal dam that they have approved just in December to be built on the Great Bend, where the river takes this massive turn and dips and has great hydropower generation capacity. And it has sent alarm bells ringing in India, because it's also a point where their political relationship, even though it's working towards stabilization, it is deeply, it still deeply remains fraught. So always there is concern in New Delhi that what if there is a strategic element to this? What if Beijing was to manipulate the water flows or divert the water and use it as a strategic tool to exert pressure on India? Because it has happened in the past. And that's where you feel the missing of the legally binding agreement. So one thing that we've always proposed as a solution is that though they have this expert level mechanism and they have these MOUs, again, they don't really restrict China from doing anything unilaterally, is for India or for downstream countries to use their existing channel of communications that are open with the other country, and maybe use the method of issue linkages and bring water along to the same level of priority as you're going to bring it to other, say, developments that are happening on the border. So that allows for at least some dialogue to ensure that the rights of the downstream are protected, especially when there is no legal instrument to back them. On just domestic level, on the health of the rivers, climate change is a massive concern. Water levels are dropping. They're both glacial-fed rivers, and there are also precipitation, rainfall-fed rivers in the region. So there has to be a lot of work done in terms of maintaining the health. But again, the shared nature of these rivers mean that the crux of the work should be done through regional cooperation and collaboration. And that's one place where I see optimism for some movement between countries in the region.
Once again, echoing, thank you so much for joining us and enlightening us. Wanted to follow Professor Opal's question with first an observation and a question back to you. Since you said this is your first time in Florida, in Tallahassee, I'm not sure if in conversation it's come up that Florida has its own border issues, specifically with Georgia, the state just to the north, and highly litigious and contentious. And so it's not at all that these challenges and problems are limited to fill in the blank anywhere abroad throughout the world. We're grappling with them here as well. And I think given your interests, you might find that at least interesting. Florida also has the development challenge where the projections that the water supplies are certainly scarce and the implications of that. Stepping back, there are certainly environmental implications, human rights implications, national security implications that cross-cut around the various regions of the world, given the water and then the relationship with food insecurity and potentially destabilizing and shifting populations. So you mentioned that through your work, ideally the policy papers that aren't necessarily an academic exercise that remain on a shelf somewhere. By the way, I think that's a great observation. Do you also take into consideration these broader themes while working bilaterally and regionally, examples of other kinds of scenarios throughout the world, not necessarily Florida and Georgia, but to try to distill actionable information back in your region?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very important to learn from other parts of the world, right? Because, like you said, it's not an issue local to South Asia. You have river sharing issues in the Middle East. You have the Turkey, Syria, Iraq water sharing challenges on the Euphrates-Tigris River basin. You have river sharing again in the Nile basin. So it is, it's really a global phenomena, and there's so much to learn. And what we've done as a part of an activity is to have a peer-to-peer connectivity process. So when you're having a South Asia focused river-based conversation, we bring in experts from Central Asia. We bring in experts from the Euphrates-Tigris River basin, and we bring in experts from the Senegal River basin to be able to share some of the good work that they have done. Now, those don't necessarily become like cookie cutter approaches that can be applied to South Asia, right? But South Asia, through our platform, has a mean and a way to learn from their peers as to some of the best practices that can be designed according to the fabric of the region and applied. So there's some sort of learning that they can go home with. The other thing that I've done is that I'm a part of this fantastic network called Women in Water Diplomacy. Shout out to the team. It is a global network, and it brings women experts working on water from across the world together. And we have occasional conversations where we're just gathering insights coming in from female perspectives, but also generally on issues like water, food, energy security nexus in your part of the world. What does it mean? Can you help us understand it better? Can we take something that can be applied to my work and someone else's work? So very much a part of the learning curve here for people like us who offer a platform, but also for experts who give us their valuable time.
Hello, I'm Shubho. I'm from Bangladesh. So my country's name was being pronounced so many times here. Just to give perspective, which is smaller than the size of Florida, and it has around 180 million people there. So I'm just giving a perspective how dense that is. So I'm just going to shift the question from water and river. I'm going to ask more towards democracy. So South Asia has seen like split of countries, like India broken into 3 countries, India to Pakistan, Pakistan to Bangladesh, and now we can see that there are stronger and deeper philosophy that plays role over democracy. I'm just not saying that it's religion, but I'm saying that there are being far right groups being active, and they are using democracy as their tool to like follow more conservative practices. So when you say that diplomacy has a role to ensure diversity and towards development, so considering the current situation going on in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, in other countries, so how do you see the diversity and diplomacy can take a role to tackle this deeper and darker philosophy than democracy in the coming days?
Thank you, thank you. And just on that note, last year at Asia Society Policy Institute ran this big exercise. It's still active on our website. I encourage you to visit. It's called the Ballot Box, where we covered every key election that happened in Asia. Last year was this big election year, right? From Indonesia to all South Asian countries that went into elections. South Asia probably had the most elections in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India. And it was an interesting exercise. I was deeply involved in the entire project, but particularly South Asia. So I've seen, speaking from a Bangladesh perspective, we saw the January elections and we saw the August events, right? The elections that reinstated former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in January. In August, we saw her ouster, and through a student-led movement and now an interim government in place. Now, one of the most challenging aspects of South Asia is its shifting political issues, shifting political landscape. I'm from Pakistan. It's very rare that a government is able to complete its full term. It is a politically volatile situation amid economic issues. You know, what we consider as polycrisis. You have climate change, you have economic issues, you have political issues. There's so much domestically for individual countries to tackle right now in the region. And I'm not saying for India as well. I think India has its fair share of domestic issues from an economic perspective, more than others, that they have to deal with, even though their foreign policy approach has been really proactive and very good relations with some of the key global players. But from a smaller state perspective, they have a lot domestically to deal with currently at the moment. So I look after, like for me, my focus area is foreign policy and diplomacy from that angle between countries. So it is hard for me to comment on, you know, how can a country revive its own sort of democratic setup and be able to get it on the right path. But I think for Bangladesh, one of the more important things would be to have the elections sooner than later, because you can see a time where the populace that's currently so active get frustrated once again. So to be able to find them, give them a good footing and have democratic elections, to have a government that's been elected in power and take the leadership role, keeping in mind the stakeholders that are important in this entire process and having their voices being represented, I think that is a good way to move forward. But also, it's important for it, while it's looking at its domestic issues, to keep its regional partners and ties with regional partners strong, because it's important to individual countries' economic development, sustainable development aspirations, working on shared issues like climate change, but also for global development. I say this always, that I think South Asia is one of those geopolitical anchors. Stability in South Asia is very important to the stability in the world. It has two nuclear-armed countries, I mean. More questions? Come on. I feel like I can.
Hi. It sounds like you have a fascinating career, and I was wondering if you can walk us through how you got here from the beginning, especially from a woman's perspective.
Just have to redo my lunch conversation. No, that's fine. But it's an interesting journey, and I think you might get my hopeless optimism after I share this one with you. I, like most, we heard from Dr. Nasser yesterday. I was raised by brown parents who love for their kids to become doctors. And I studied bio, chem, physics in my O levels. We did GCE in Pakistan. And soon come A levels, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to do something different. Don't want to spend so many years studying. That sounds terrible. So I want to be able to make money sooner, want to be an adult sooner, want to be in an office, in a suit and whatnot. So let's just take accounts and econ and do my levels and see how it goes. That pivot wasn't easy, but I got through, and I did econ as my bachelor's. I went to UCL, I did econ as my bachelor's, and then I decided to follow a career in investment banking and mergers and acquisition particularly. I was very particular what I wanted. Mergers and acquisition, IBD, Canary Wharf in London, tall building. I wanted to also see, if I had an option with management consulting, going to like PwC, you might have heard some of those names, Deloitte, all of those places. So let's do a master's in management with finance. So I took a degree with BPP Business School, and I did a management with finance master. With my only experience in international relations being my exchange visit to India, and I had come to the United States as a child in 2010, first time, for the Global Young Leaders Conference. So that was, I don't know if it's still active, but it brought together young leaders from the world, and I was a part of it. So that was a good experience on how, and I had done a lot of Model United Nations, so I knew some bits of how this works, but it wasn't my passion project at that time. And then one winter, while I was sending out 100-some applications on the daily job application, trying to find a job with 6 months to graduate from my master's, I was in Karachi visiting my parents. And as most parents do, they bother you till you drop, is to take you with them somewhere they think is going to be educational for you. So my father forced my brother and I to join him for this dinner that was being hosted in the honor of a former ambassador, who I just mentioned, Ambassador Cameron Munter. Just come, it'll be knowledgeable. He's a former ambassador of the United States to Pakistan. You might learn something. I had no choice. So we went. And Ambassador Munter, of course, had been the US ambassador at the most critical time in the relationship between US and Pakistan. It was the time of the Bin Laden raid that some of you might be familiar with, but also some other events. So he had a wealth of experience. So it was really engaging to listen to him. But he also introduced this organization he heads, this think tank called the East West Institute. And that really intrigued me. I had not heard of a think tank like that before, the way he presented it. And after the conversation, I went up to him and he said, I would love to do some research for you. It's really just started like that. I have some time. I would love to produce something, produce a paper. Someone might read it. So I have time. I can do 2,000, 5,000, 8,000 words. Let me know. And if there are any internships, also let me know. And I was on a plane back to London again. 100 applications a day situation ongoing. I was also somebody on a student visa, and the job market was not kind to someone who was not a local in the UK at that time. So I, 4 months in, found an opportunity. Got an email that East West Institute was looking for somebody full-time to do research on China's economic footprint in South Asia. Would you be interested in applying? I was like, yeah, hell yes. I was younger at that time, so younger than this at that time, I have to clarify, where I had a little bit more steam in me to say, okay, pack my bags, another continent. And yes, the rest is history. I never looked back. I think my first full-time experience has always been in international relations. And my entire training, I was able to apply a lot of my econ, so I will not devalue my degree. My father paid a lot for it. But I think a lot of my learning came from meeting fantastic people like yourself and learning on the job.
So first off, thanks so much for speaking today. I really enjoyed your presentation. My question, one of the things I think of when I think of South Asia is the large and dense populations that I know were previously mentioned. So like what kind of, mindset do you think policymakers have to come in with when dealing with such a large group of people versus like something smaller?
That's an excellent question. I think that kind of in a nutshell explains the problem with South Asia. The region's importance for the longest time in the policy world has been truly focused on its geographical location. It's so close to China. It has a well of natural resources. But over the years, the rising populations, with the kind of population you have in India and even Pakistan, which is more smaller size, stands at 230 million something, and Bangladesh, they're all growing. With this age in which we live in, where climate change is a threat, where economic issues, where you don't have enough jobs to match the amount of people that are seeking education and graduating, those are very real challenges that the international community must pay attention to as well. I think one complaint that South Asian nations have always made is that, you look at us from the lens of Afghanistan, or you look at us from a certain lens, which is China's presence in the region. But it really has to come from the internal challenges of the region. And part of our role here is to magnify and amplify that. Can we get stories from the region, or my literal role or whatever I can play can support in terms of drawing attention to what we understand and recognize as challenges in the region? Can we draw attention to the plight of women and young girls? Like I mentioned, that this is from a health perspective, from the safety perspective, not easy walking 4 miles a day or more just to collect water. And that's like one way of the journey, and unsafe routes. What is it that one can do when something like COVID-19 strikes and you have such big populations to manage and don't have the capacity or the infrastructure to really support getting the right sort of medical resources to everyone? How do you get early warning systems in place? And when the floods happened, 2022 floods happened in Pakistan, it affected everyone, from the rural centers to the urban center. The entire country was paralyzed, 15 billion some losses in dollar USD. That's colossal. And even now, the country is still reeling from the impacts of it. The rehabilitation and restoration amount that is required exceeds way more than what the country has, given its political and economic instability at this current time. So through our work on sort of building climate resilience in South Asia, I worked on a project with the World Bank, precisely focused on how do you make South Asia more resilient. And one of the conversations was exactly around financing. How do you make sure international players can play a role in mobilizing the financing that the country needs to be climate resilient? What are the political economy barriers? That is, when you try and implement a policy or try to conceive a policy, what are the challenges that you need to keep in mind as the locals? Maybe it's like, I want to implement a low carbon policy. I want people to move from one way of living to completely another way of living without educating them. They will challenge that. So how can you make that process easy for them to make sure that tangible benefits of transition or change is in their knowledge? It's not something that hits them like a bus and they don't know what to do. So all of that becomes manifold when you consider the population that is to be covered. So sometimes, speaking a little bit more domestically from in terms of strictly climate policy, one thing that we've noticed a lot is there is, in countries like Pakistan or even in India, there's sometimes a disconnect between federal and state level. So how can you make that coordination easy so that you're able to serve your populations well? You have a federal policy that can be well implemented. States might be able to do something that's well suited to its population, and everyone gets to benefit. It's an uphill battle and a long way to go. But our little role again as a policy institute, as a South Asia focused individual, is to make sure that everyone gets a sense of the scale of work we need to do.
So, thank you all so much for coming on behalf of all of our sponsors. This has been a great conference. We've had two wonderful keynotes, Maher Nasser and Farwa Aamer, and so this has been great. You all make this, ultimately we've packed out the house each time. I did want to just mention here, part of the Asia Society Policy Institute, especially my students who have to do policy, get the opportunity to work on policy briefs this semester. But this is actually written by Farwa here, the South Asia Snapshot. Is it monthly? Is that correct?
It's monthly.
Monthly, and I believe it comes out Monday.
Come on Monday.
Monday. So QR code here, sign up. Again, thank you so much to everyone. This is all on YouTube. So if you've missed anything, if you missed yesterday's great keynote, today's panels, yesterday's panels, if you check out the conference's YouTube page or the Center for Global Engagement's YouTube page, you get to go rewatch everything again and take great notes. So come back next year for the 12th annual conference, and thanks so much.
Can I call in Dr. Nasser?
Sure. Oh, sure.